This is Will Tchakirides interviewing Mark Mueller for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. It is 1:14 p.m. on July 11th, 2024. This interview is being recorded at WNCU Studios on the campus of North Carolina Central University. We're in Durham, North Carolina. All right, let's begin. Please state your full name for the record and tell me what your relationship is to WNCU.
My name is Mark Mueller, and I am the program director and morning show host at the radio station.
Excellent, Mark. How long have you worked at this station?
This October will be 2 years.
Congrats on your upcoming anniversary.
Thank you.
So I want to take it back a little bit and understand a bit about your early life and who you are.
Okay.
Tell me when and where you were born and a little bit about the people who raised you.
I was born back in 1968, December of 1968, so I'm 55 years old, which I'm still having a hard time believing. I grew up on Long Island in New York. My parents had myself and my sister, and basically we grew up having a normal middle-class Long Island lifestyle, and it was when I was in 11th grade that I started working in radio. So it's almost 39 years now.
Oh, wow. And what did your parents do for work?
Well, my mom was your typical 1970s, 80s stay-at-home mom. She actually went back to, I shouldn't say finally went, she went back to work in 1986, just working in a department store to have a job. But my dad worked in human resources. And he worked for Nabisco, obviously the cookie company, but they also owned a company called Aurora, which made like these really cool car sets in the 70s. So that was like one of the fun things, having endless, it was called AFX, and basically endless AFX Aurora cars and stuff. So it was a fun job that my dad had, and we got to experience the free toys from it.
Cool. What was Long Island like growing up?
You know, to me, it was life because I didn't know anything different. But I mean, basically, it's great because you have a beach, a 5-minute drive north, 5-minute drive south. You got two coastlines, and now, like, I've been in North Carolina for 17 plus years now, and it's a couple-hour drive to Wilmington. So there's certain things you appreciate about Long Island, and then there's certain things that you say, thankfully, I'm in North Carolina now. And cost of living being one thing.
Yeah. What are the demographics like in Long Island, where you're from?
When I was there, because it's funny you say that, because when I was there, it was, I would say, and this is just a number off the top of my head, I would say probably 95% white or Caucasian. People in North Carolina have looked at like my high school yearbook and are like, where's the diversity? And I'm like, that's basically what Long Island was, at least where I grew up. I've heard, because I visit like once a year now, I've heard it's gotten more diverse. There's been a big increase in Hispanics coming to the area. I don't know if it's more in Suffolk County where I grew up or in Nassau County, but apparently it has diversified since I left, which was 1998 that I left in Long Island.
Okay, you left in 98. Where did you attend schools?
I actually, because back then it was what I could afford. I went to a community college for 2 years, Suffolk County Community College, got my degree in broadcasting, and since I was already working in radio, I basically got out of college and was working full-time. I will say one of my regrets, though, is not having finished my 4-year degree, just because I would have liked to have done it, but I've been lucky enough for 37 of 39 years to work in this field, with the exception of a small gap where I was not, so...
Even before that, tell me about your elementary and high schools. What town were you from in Long Island?
I grew up in a little town called Port Jefferson Station, which in itself was just a normal middle-class suburban town, but it connected to a town called Port Jefferson, which to this day is still one of my favorite places in the entire country. It's a 5-minute drive from where I grew up, and just the way I look at it, like life was so much simpler 100 years ago. And if you go to downtown Port Jefferson, all the buildings are still up there from 100 years ago, and obviously they've been updated since then. But every time I'm down there, I just picture like the horse and buggies like on the main road, and now it's like 2024, and how life has changed. But I think it would have been like a lot better to be around like 100 years ago then.
Before you got to that radio station as a young person, was the radio on in the house at all? Did you listen to radio?
Oh, yes. And it's interesting because I grew up listening to one radio station and one radio station only, which was WVLI. It was the top 40 station on Long Island. And when I was in, I'm going to say maybe the end of 9th grade, definitely all of 10th grade, I would win contests like every other week. I'd win an album, I'd win movie tickets, and I started talking to the guy who did news on the morning show. He wound up working at that station for 25 years, and he did a show, a local countdown show, Sunday mornings from 11 till 3, and when I say he was better than Casey Kasem, he was better than Casey Kasem. So I'd call up each week to talk to him, and one day, this is how I got into radio, one day he said to me, you know, we have internships if you'd like to do that, and what would you be most interested in? And at the time my answer was promotions. Obviously it's since shifted to being on air and programming. And January of 1986 I started interning at WVLI on Long Island and wound up working there for the better part of 12 years till I left Long Island, first as an intern, then as a morning show producer, then as an on-air talent, and eventually I moved to Maryland.
So you were about 18 or so and kind of early.
I was 17 when I started there. I literally just turned 17, and it was the experience of a lifetime because it was the number one station on Long Island at the time. And in 12th grade, like I was backstage at Bon Jovi during their Slippery When Wet tour, got to meet them, and literally every single person I grew up with in my school was like in awe of what I was doing. So I was like this little local high school celebrity who was getting to do all these things that everybody else only dreamed of. And that's basically where my love for radio began. It started out with like talking to that DJ on Sunday mornings, but then transitioning into interning. And then by 1990, I was an employee there.
Can you speak a bit to commercial radio and what it was like at that time? And I know it's changed quite a bit. And this was, tell me about that station and how it was managed, how it was owned, and what their priorities were.
Yeah, definitely. Radio, the way I like to say it, it used to be more fun. Like you wouldn't have a company owning 7 stations. I mean, they couldn't back then, but you wouldn't have a station owning 7 or 8 stations in the same market. And I think it was more localized. Like when I started at WVLI, it was owned by Beck Ross Communications, so basically like a mom and pop outlet, and everybody was just a family. I mean, we literally, I still to this day am in touch with so many people I worked with almost 40 years ago at that radio station, and it's because we were that close-knit family. And like in the mid 90s, whenever the Telecommunications Act was passed, in 96, I think, and companies can have more than one AM or FM, and all of a sudden, Beck Ross sold to, I think it was Chancellor, and then to somebody else, and then to somebody else, and every time they kept getting sold, there were more stations involved, and before you know it, like, there were so many stations that were owned together. Like our biggest competitor at the time was WALK, and our second biggest was WBAB, the adult contemporary and rock stations. And there was a point where all three of us were then all of a sudden, instead of competing with each other, we're still competing, but we were owned together. And we were in the same building together. And flash forward to now, and WBAB and WVLI are still owned together. Walk went back to, I forget who owns them now, but it was basically, I think, a lot more simpler back then, but a lot more fun. And like the way I like to describe it is radio people in general, and I think this is because of the pre-internet era, were more considered like rock stars. Like we used to have these little publicity photos, and I still have mine at home, the ones that I didn't give away. And my air name at the radio station, which everybody makes fun of, was Malibu Mark.
Okay.
And so when we used to do events, and we would do like 5 to 6 like club events on like Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, and all the other events during the day, and we literally had crowds of people just waiting to get our autographs, like we were rock stars.
Wow.
And you don't get that anymore. And I think that's because of like now you can just log on to a station's website and see what the person looks like. Back then, oh, such and such is going to be here. People would flock to see you, and then because they actually were seeing you, they treated you like you were a celebrity, which obviously in my mind I wasn't. But people always love to joke around. Oh, somebody still has your picture hanging on their wall, and I'm like, yeah, that would be hysterical.
So, so you're speaking to, like, before that, talking about deregulation and monopolization, I guess.
Right.
Of the
Yes.
industry.
Yeah.
Did you, when you were, I understand you're young and you're starting out in commercial radio and it's exciting and new. Did you have any engagement with public radio, or did you think?
I had never worked in public radio until I got this job, which was, like I said, October of 2022. Mm-hmm. So this is my first experience with public radio.
Okay, so take me, we'll get to what it means to work at WNCU. But take me on the journey of your professional life in commercial radio and the different stations and places you lived and how that changed.
I've worked at a lot of stations throughout the years, but then there's the ones that like stick out in my mind because I was at WVLI from 86 to 98, and to me that is something I will cherish forever. But like in that time, I also worked at like a couple of smaller stations, like just doing shifts here and there. So I did like a news at a station called WRIV out in Eastern Long Island, and I did like mornings in 95 at this little standard station called WRIB was the standard station I did the mornings at, and then there was a news station that I did out east, and I can't even think of the call letters. It was so long ago. But so for the most part, it was BLI from 86 to 98, and then I moved to Maryland. And because of my love for Top 40, I sent a tape out. Back then, you had to mail air checks. You couldn't email them. And I sent a tape to Z104 WWZZ, which was the top 40 station in Washington D.C. at the time, and they called and brought me in for an interview, and I wound up working there for almost 7 years. I was not full time; I had a full time job doing music research with a company called Mediabase, and I was basically doing weekend shifts, and then if somebody was out during the week, I would do the 7 to midnight shift. So essentially, I typically would do like 2 shifts one week and then maybe 5 shifts the next week. And it was a great station. Unfortunately, they folded in January of 2006, I believe it was. And then I moved to North Carolina where I've been. Oh.
Yeah, hold on one second. Where in Maryland were you living outside D.C.?
I lived in 3 different areas. First 3 years I was in Annapolis, which is the most beautiful historic place in the country. I just love it. Then I lived 3 years in a place called Chesapeake Beach, and final 3 years were in Baltimore County.
Okay. And what does a music researcher do?
This is actually interesting because this is pre computers being able to figure it out. So when Mediabase launched, it basically monitored every single music radio station in the country. And what it was, and this is so funny too, because back then, this is in January of 98 when I started there. So obviously a long time ago, and we had to get these high-speed 64K lines in our house because it was working from home. 64K, obviously, today would be considered like slow as could be. Yeah. But basically, when I had the interview, it was, okay, what format are you an expert in music in? So my 2 areas were at the time were Hot AC and Top 40. So they give you a music quiz for the interview, and they'll play a snippet of a song, like literally 3 seconds. If you got the song, I moved on to the next one, and so forth. And I got every song, so I got hired. So literally, and I did this job for 7 years. I would listen to songs and code them, and the way it was done, because it's not nowadays, it's all just picked up by a computer, like it'll detect a song. Back then, every 2 minutes, we were given 13 stations a day, each of us. So however many radio stations there are in the country, each person got 13 stations and had to transcribe them 7 days a week, and basically, every 2 minutes, we'd get a 5-second clip of the song. So if a song was, say, like 5 minutes long, you might get 2 5-second clips. If a song's 3 minutes long, you might get 1 5-second clip, and then you'd have to code it. So it would be like the first 3 or 4 letters, I forget because it's been so long since I've done it, of the artist, like like Bon Jovi would be BON, and then if it's You Give Love a Bad Name, you do the initials YGLA. I think it was 4. So every song had a code, and literally you transcribed nonstop. You would take breaks throughout the day because the audio was 15 minutes behind. So like at 12:15 in the morning, we would get the final audio from the previous day, and then once you're done with your 13 stations, go to bed, and when you got up, there was audio, say, from like midnight to 9 there to start your day.
Wow.
Yeah. Tedious.
Did you enjoy it at all?
You know, it was working from home. The first few years, it was just a job to me. But then, like, my son was born in 2001, and my ex-wife was a school teacher, so I didn't have to put my son in daycare. So that was the best part of the job. Literally worked at whatever hour. As long as my work got done by 12:15 that morning, they didn't care when you worked, or as long as it got done. So it was the perfect job at the perfect time.
Gotcha. And what was different about the D.C. metro region compared to Long Island? What stuck out to you?
Oh, well, you know, it's interesting because people say Long Island is like a false market, because I forget what it is. It's like a top 20 market or maybe top 25 market. But I think it's only that big because it's part of New York or bleeds from New York City. When I got to D.C., it just felt like you were in big market radio. Like we had 2 different studios. The first studios were in Arlington, Virginia, and I remember looking out the one window. Literally, you see, like when the sun was coming up, looking out the window, and all I saw was the Washington Monument with like and I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. It's like at this point, my career was started in '86. So it was like maybe 12 or 13 years old, and the fact that I went from being this like kid who was interning, who would ride his bike to the radio station to intern, and now I'm on in a top, whatever it was, 7 market in the country, the biggest top 40 radio station in that market. It just felt really, really neat. And the morning guy at the station was named Billy Bush, who's obviously became famous since he left the station, but his relatives were the Bushes. And like Barbara Bush would call up the radio station. I remember like they would do like morning like Jeopardy or something with Aunt Barbara. And I'm thinking, how cool is this that I'm working at a radio station with the guys like related to the President of the United States?
That's interesting.
So,
what about D.C. as a city, culturally, socially?
It was without a doubt more culturally diverse than Long Island when I lived there. It was basically a mix of everybody in Washington, D.C., and it showed like in the different radio stations as well, because there were a lot of urban stations, there were top 40 stations, it was country stations even in like the Baltimore area. I'm trying to remember if D.C. had a country station, but either way, it was so much more diverse, and like the way I love the history in Annapolis, obviously the history in Washington, D.C. is second to none, and it's just something that's really cool to be a part of and to work in a city that has so much history.
Yeah. Okay. And then how long were you in D.C. area?
I was there for 9 years. Well, I lived in Maryland for 9 years, and I worked in D.C. Yeah.
And then what got you out to North Carolina?
My wife at the time wanted to move to North Carolina, and we did. So when we moved down here, I had called up a local, I guess hot AC would be a term, or classic. Maybe if it was considered a classic hits, it was Y102.9. So I think classic hits is more of a term because they played like 70s and 80s. So I guess classic hits. So I was only doing weekend shifts there, and it wasn't until a couple years later that iHeart in Raleigh was launching a news station, and I am, even though I only really worked like in a few like brief news jobs, I am a news junkie through and through. Like if somebody says, "What do you love doing most in radio?" I have 2 answers. I love programming, and I love doing news. And my reason for wanting to do news more than anything else is I feel like I'm using my brain more with writing, producing, and anchoring a newscast than in anything else I've ever done. And I just, to me, it was a great experience.
Who influenced you as a news person in radio?
Oh boy, let me think. One of the things I worked at, one of the places I worked at Fox News in New York City for their radio division, and they just had so many incredible talented anchors there. And like, I worked there first as a freelance reporter based out of North Carolina. I did that from 2010 to 14. And then I was hired out of the New York City offices to be a producer. So I actually worked in New York for a couple of years there. And they have some very talented anchors that like are basically considered like radio anchors. So a lot of people don't know their names like they would like a Shepard Smith or somebody who was on TV at the time. But there's like female anchor named Lisa Lacera who was just like brilliant at what she did. There's a male anchor named Karen McHugh, Kerin, and like to this day, I look back at like the work that these two specifically did, and I'm sure there's so many other people there, and it was just I left each day feeling like I accomplished something, and it's because I worked with such a great team. And it wasn't just the news anchors; it was the writers, it was the producers. I always like to say, and people are very partisan nowadays. So it's like, oh, you worked at Fox News, you must be like a hard right-wing conservative. And where I worked in the radio division, at least, it was the most basically not. It was no partisan politics. We had a job to do. We wrote news, we produced it, and we reported on it. And in my opinion, it's their old moniker, fair and balanced. But in the radio division, we were fair and balanced. And I'm going to backtrack a little too, because basically when I got to North Carolina, I told you I was working part-time at that station, and that was in 2009 when iHeart launched their news station, which was WRDU, and I was actually hired to do midday news. That was my first full-time news job, and this is how I got involved with Fox, because we carried their national newscast at the top of the hour. Mm-hmm. And I said to my boss one day, his name was Brian Taylor, his real name is Brian Shield, but Brian Taylor, I said, hey, would it be, because I was a news anchor locally, so I would report and gather sound for all my stories as well. And that's something I prided myself in doing, like getting the best sound for a news story. And I said to him one day, I said, hey, would you mind if I like tried to pitch one of my stories to Fox as like freelance work? He's like, dude, if you can do it, more power to you. And the first two stories I pitched, they picked up, and we got paid like a fee on top of like our normal fee for doing the job, because basically you were selling the story to them. And over the course of the next few years, I did over 200 stories as a freelance reporter, and that at the time was by far the thing I was most proud of, because me being the news junkie that I am, got to say, hey, I'm a freelance radio reporter with Fox News, and this is so cool. And so I was offered a job. Oh, I did it again. I was offered a job in 2015 in New York City with Fox, but my house and my family were here. So the way I wound up doing it, my mom is still on Long Island. I took the job on a freelance basis, but like a freelance full-time basis. So I do 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks, I do 20, 21, 22 shifts, and then take a week off. And I was literally going back and forth every 3 weeks, driving from New York to North Carolina, back and forth. And then it finally just got to be too much, and I wound up leaving in October of 2017 to come back here full-time. And that eventually led to me being where I am now, but I had other jobs, obviously, in radio when I came back.
So it raises a host of questions for me about the corporate news environment in radio, and what is the mission of corporate news, and how does it differ from sort of public radio as we understand it?
Well, I have worked at 3 different news outlets per se. I worked at Rush Radio, which was iHeart at the time, and they had launched it, and then Fox News, and then my job before I came here was as a news anchor at WBT, which is literally the #1 rated station in Charlotte. Their morning show is #1, and it's an AM station. In 2024, for an AM station to be #1 shows you how good it is. And it really is the greatest morning show, I think, in the history of like radio that I've listened to. I shouldn't say in the history of all radio, but in all morning shows that I've ever been a part of or listened to, it's the best. And
what did you like about it? What made it the best?
Oh, the guy who hosted, I'm 55. I'm going to guess the guy who hosted, his name is Bo Thompson. And I'm going to guess he's late 40s. Let's just say 48, 49 years old. He, like me, started, like how I started out at WVLI as a teenager, he started out at WBT as a teenager. When I was there, they celebrated their 100th birthday, so probably like 103 now. And just the nicest guy you would ever want to meet. And he wound up, he's hosted the morning show for years now. And he wound up bringing in a lady named Beth Troutman to be his co-host. And the two of them, I have never worked with, and I think this is more to both of them because they're so good together. The chemistry on air between them was the best. Like, I've worked on morning shows where the hosts don't like each other and it's so obvious. These two, whether you turn them on at 6 in the morning or if you turn them on at 10 in the morning, they're having a great time and they're laughing. And it's just a great experience.
And what kinds of issues are they covering?
Okay, this is where it gets interesting because they do, WBT does all local programming from 6 in the morning or 5 in the morning, but it's till 8 o'clock at night. And from once the morning show gets off to 8 o'clock at night, it's basically local talk shows but political, like right-leaning talk shows with the issues of the day. They for the most part stay away from politics on the morning show, and it's just basically talking about anything that's happening in the community, anything that's happening in their personal lives.
Just that particular program as part
yes,
of
Yes. And this is why it was one of the greatest experiences of my radio career. I have so many great samples of this on my SoundCloud page, but I would like periodically talk to them about stuff and like off the air, and next thing you know, they're having me on the air talk about it, and I build up such a rapport with them that they look forward to having me on just as much as I loved being on. It could be a simple, like one day they were talking about old catalogs from the 1990s or something, and the next day, because don't ask me why I had a service merchandise catalog from 1996, and we did a whole segment on the air with all the different things that were out then. If they were talking about music one day, because like I'm the ultimate music geek, and whenever there was music news, whenever there was something happening musically, let's bring Mark Mueller on, and it's almost like I was their go-to guy for fun segments, and I probably went on like twice a week, I'd say, in the time that I was there. And just like I go back and I listen to like some of the stuff that we've done, and I could say in my career, my entire career going back to 1986, that is by far the most fun I've ever had, even though it was a news station and news is not supposed to be fun, but the work I did as a news person was rewarding, but the work I did on the morning show was just a blast. And I'll remember that as long as I'm working in radio.
Okay. Now, tell me about the what got you to WNCU and working at an HBCU radio station. This is very different from Fox News Radio or the Top 40 radio and the music side. This is a completely different world. So I want to know what got you here and what you first encountered and what you experienced and what it felt like.
Okay, so the one job I did not mention in my career to you, which is going to lead to why I'm here. So I am, as I said before, like a music geek, and I started making my own personal music charts in January of 1984, and I wound up doing it for 32 years. And at the end of each year, I'd put together a year-end survey, and I created a playlist of songs I would use based on these charts that I created. So I created a playlist of how I'd program a classic hit station. And in the early 2000s, I want to say 2002 or 2003, I wrote an article for Radio and Records, which is no longer around, but it was basically how I'd program one of these stations. And a guy contacted me from Rogers Broadcasting in Canada and said to me, hey, I loved your article. We're launching a new format in the United States. It's already here in Canada called Jack FM, and we'd like to buy your playlist and use it for our stations. And I was like, wow. So I initially sold my playlist that I created for a very low amount because I had no idea like what it should sell for, and I I sold my playlist, and I did that. And all these years later, when I got back to North Carolina when did I move? So I moved to when I left Fox News and came back in 2017. I needed a full-time job here, and there was a station in Fayetteville owned by Beasley called Bob FM, and I wound up interviewing for a promotions job there. And at the time, the lady who interviewed me, and her family owned the station, so she was not just like the general manager. She had the same last name as the owners. She just asked me a question. She said, "Hey, I just want to ask you something." She said, "If you could do any one thing at this radio station, what would it be?" And I said to her, I said, I'm going to tell you right now. I said, because I have this love for classic hits. And I went into like the articles that I wrote. I said, I would love to program your classic hit station. And she said, I might be able to make that happen. And a few months later, after interviews and process, I was hired as program director for that classic hit station, and created in my opinion, some of the most fun imaging that was ever done for like a classic hit station. That's one of the other things I'm very proud of in my career.
Can you just briefly define classic hits as a
genre? Basically, growing up, we there was no such thing as classic hits. It was like when I grew up in the 80s, oldies were considered like 50s and 60s. Now, since oldies are still oldies, stuff from when I grew up, like the 70s, the 80s, now the 90s are considered classic hits. So basically, if a station, like when I programmed a station, I had a cutoff of 1976. So I didn't play anything from 1975 or before. But at the time, nobody was really playing 90s in the format. So I was one of the first ones to go all the way up to 1999. Because 1999 had probably the biggest pop hit of the 90s, which was Smooth by Santana and Rob Thomas. So basically, I used 1976 as my starting year and went up to 1999 and just created a fun station. And I know I apologize. And so I worked there, and unfortunately there was a change in management, and the lady who hired me wound up leaving. And as you know, the way radio works, somebody else took the station in a different direction, and that actually wound up being a blessing in disguise in a way, because I said at the beginning of our interview, I've worked 37 of 39 years in radio. Well, when I left Bob FM, I didn't have a radio job, so I was working outside of radio for almost 2 years, and that's when the opportunity at WBT became available, the new station in Charlotte. So I was dating someone at the time, and I said, "What do you think I should do?" And she said, "This seems like too good an opportunity to pass up. My advice: take the job in Charlotte, keep looking for one in the Raleigh-Durham area, and when the right job comes along, take it." And I wound up working at BT for only 14 months, even though it seems like it was there for an eternity. And the job here at WNCU became available, and I had the programming experience. And back then it was all virtual when I was interviewing. So I met with Lakeisha Freeman, our general manager, and a bunch of other people. I think there was like 6 or 7 people on the Zoom call. And in my opinion, the thing that I think, even though I've never worked in public radio before, the thing that I think helped get me the position over other people is one of the questions I was asked, and I this is just speculation on my part, but what would you do to get a younger audience while keeping our current audience? Because right now, WNCU, the average listener is mid-60s. We had, at the time, like it was 60 to 75 where like the bulk of the listeners were from. And when I say get younger listeners, I'm talking about people my age who are like in their 50s. And I created a separate category when I got hired here, in addition to all the jazz categories that were already in the system, which I had to refine thoroughly to make them up to standard. And that probably took me about 6 months alone to do. But I created 2 specific categories that I think help bring in those younger people. I created, and I'm gonna have to cough again. I apologize. I created a best category, which basically are songs everybody knows, but we're not getting played on on the station. And in those categories, I put like maybe 150 songs in there. And then I created something that was not on the station or hardly on the station, which is an R&B category. And this is a jazz station during the week, but the way I did it is I created the category which I call R&B, and it's not only R&B. Basically, it's got your classics like Earth, Wind and Fire, Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder, artists like that. But it also has jazz artists who did covers of R&B songs. Like there are so many great jazz covers that are out there that's just incredible. From like Quincy Jones did a great version of "I'll Be Good to You." Robert Glasper did "Human" by the Human League, and it's just amazing. Like when you go through the library, how many great covers are out there. So I created a second category with these R&B songs and these covers, and these songs don't get overplayed. They get played like once every couple hours on a radio station, and the way I have it programmed, each song is only going to come up once a month. But like if I played a song this morning that was an R&B song, like I played Rubber Band Man by the Spinners this morning, that song's not going to come up now for another month, and it'll come up in a different day part. So in a month it might come up in Afternoon Drive. In 2 months it might come up in middays, and then I'll get it again like in 3 months, and by then people won't. So it's not like taking away from the jazz music, but it's trying to get people to, because the way the ratings work, 5 minutes and 15 minutes, we got to get people to listen. Mm-hmm. So if people's attention spans get thrown away and they tune away 4 minutes and 59 seconds into that quarter hour, we don't get the ratings. So my goal is to keep them listening. So if they're listening to a great jazz song, if they're listening to something they like, the next song is so important. The break is important. Whatever an announcer is going to talk about, that's just as important too. And if you're throwing on a song that they're going to know, it might not be a jazz song, it might be one of those R&B songs, but chances are you're going to get people to stay tuned in a little while longer, and that brings the ratings up. And in the time that I've been here, the ratings for like people 45 plus and 55 plus have gone up significantly. So I feel like I'm slowly getting to where I want to with that, mm-hmm. but it's always a work in progress.
Yeah, sounds like you're answering a question I wanted to get to, which is, how did your experience in commercial radio shape who you are at this public radio station and the work that you're doing? Is there, in addition to what you just laid out, are there other ways that you feel well prepared based on your commercial radio work and are applying a different mindset or a different approach to this public radio station?
Oh, absolutely. Like every single thing I've done in radio is useful today. My news background, like I consider, even though if somebody says, "What are you?" I'm the program director. I'm the morning show host. I am a journalist, and I always will be a journalist. And like when I started here, whenever the news director was out, because in the past, if the news director was out sick, local news just didn't get covered that day. But I have the experience of doing news, so I immediately jumped in. And now, if somebody was out, I would. Because I have experience writing a local newscast as well, so I would write a newscast, anchor a newscast. So basically, anything that I've learned in public radio or in past radio is helpful in public radio today. And my programming philosophy is the same thing too. I mean, there's a saying in radio: play the hits, and it doesn't matter what format you're in. And that's part of the reason, like the way I made the classic hit station in Fayetteville successful, by playing the hits and knowing what to play because of my research background as well, which helps. Here, it's the same thing. Play the hits. So when I refined the playlist, I made sure like the key songs by each of these artists were being played, and songs by like these R&B artists that were not getting played, knowing which ones to play, and creating the ideal clock so that everything is flowing smoothly from morning till night on the radio station. So it doesn't matter if you're programming a commercial station or a non-commercial station. You're going to take the knowledge you've learned along the way and implement it to now there are rules that obviously you have to follow. Like we don't have commercials on the radio station, and we have to be careful the way we word like underwriting and stuff like that, because it cannot come across sounding like an advertisement. And those are just little things that you learn along the way. But for me, I'd say, like, to answer your question, everything I've learned in radio over the years, I'm using today in my job.
On the news side, is there a news director currently at the station?
The news director left, I think, about 6 months ago after 20-something years at the station. And
Kimberly Pierce.
Yes, and we're still looking to hire a news person.
So there's a long history here. WNCU, it's steeped in a lineage of sort of black empowered radio. It comes, Shaw's radio station was a major influence on the founding of this station. I'm interested in the news coverage since you began here, and what issues have been important to you that get covered, what is important to the community locally, and what is that relationship with this community as you've seen so far?
Well, like for me as a news person personally, knowing the local issues, like knowing the politicians, knowing what's happening in Durham, like the big issue last year was the schools in Durham, the teachers, the teacher issues, the busing issues. And if somebody is tuning into a local news, and our newscasts were not, like when I was at WBT, I would do 21 newscasts a day. I literally would write, produce, and anchor 21 newscasts, and they were 5 to 6 minutes long. So they were lengthy newscasts. Here we did shorter local newscasts. There's only a couple a day that we did, and they were 3 minutes long. But you got to cover the stuff that needs to be covered for your community. So you can't just go to AP and say, okay, here's the 3 stories on AP, because chances are they might not be covering something Durham specific. So you have to know where to look, know where to research, know who to call to be able to write that story about Durham schools, to be able to talk about what's happening with the Durham mayor, to talk about any crime that may have happened, like in the area. Like I remember, and this was a huge national story. There was a major shooting in Raleigh on a trail right when I started here, and it was making national news. And just to like be able to make sure we were covering the specifics of that and writing the story so it didn't sound like we were just writing a story. You were making the community aware of issues that they needed to learn. And as a anchor, as a reporter, as a producer, even though I'm program director now, I wanted to make sure we were covering everything we needed to for every local story that we were covering.
And when you cover a story like a shooting, what are some of the questions that it raises? How do you want to tell the full story, the full picture of that kind of event?
Well, basically, because we are such a smaller news operation here, it's basically writing a quick story. But like my philosophy, I shouldn't say quick story, writing a brief story, because you're only doing like a 3-minute newscast, and you're going to pack what you can in there. But in the past, like when I would do the stories for Rush Radio in Raleigh, and then which also was my Fox News stuff, I would look at the story. I would make sure I understood all the facts of the story, and then say, who can I call? And getting sound to me is the most important part of any local story. And I had the advantage because when I was even working at Rush Radio, because I was freelancing for Fox at the time, if you say you're from Fox News, people are more likely to call you back than, oh, I'm from the local news station in Raleigh. And whether it was a political issue, whether it was a major crime story, 9 times out of 10, 19 times out of 20, whoever I called would call back. And basically you just ask them questions and talk to them. And at the end of that interview, listen back for those best sound bites, and you can put together easily 3 good stories from those sound bites. Basically, you take the sound bite and write your news story around each specific sound bite.
So you're crafting the narrative.
Exactly. So whatever the story happened to be, like when Governor McCrory, who I actually worked with at WBT, and we had a few laughs over this, but when he first launched his first campaign for governor, I called up and requested an interview, and he gave it to me probably because I said it was from Fox News. And we just had like a great conversation. It was like that with every story that I wound up covering. And basically, like I said, it's if I'm doing like at WBT, if I had 21 newscasts a day and I was writing stories with sound bites, okay, I'm going to take those 3 sound bites, going to write the stories around it, and now I can use those stories in 3 different newscasts. So I would typically, I would say, like, rerun news stories every 3rd hour. So if I had 3 different versions of it, like say 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, you're going to run the same stories, and then 9 o'clock you run the 6 o'clock one again. And by creating different narratives of each story, you're keeping the audience interested and entertained, because how many people want to hear the same story over and over? And because I realize people don't listen to radio, say, 4 hours straight, but if somebody's listening at the top of those hours, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and you're doing the exact same story and the exact same newscast, people are going to get bored. So I always prided myself in writing and putting together quality newscasts, and I'm still proud of that work today.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe journalism can be objective?
You know, that's actually a great question, because I worked at Fox, and I told you our radio division, obviously, in my opinion, was fair and balanced. Obviously, the TV side leans right politically, and then you have your news organizations like CNBC, and yes, I'm going to put CNN there, lean left politically, even though CNN would probably like to say they're more in the middle. But I think the days of like ABC with Pete, even when I grew up, it was Peter Jennings, Tom Brokaw, and Dan Rather. And in my opinion, that like back there was CNN back then, but it was less to the left because there was no Fox News back then. It was basically CNN reporting news. But when the local outlets like ABC, NBC, and CBS had their 3 core guys, and obviously Walter Cronkite before that, I just think news was news, and anchors took news. Anchors were more credible back then, I think. Like today I look at like if I watch David Muir, which I watch every night before Jeopardy, because I'm a Jeopardy nerd as well. You could tell he's just reading what he's given and doing his job, and it's not to the left, it's not to the right, it's just like a quality newscast, and he might have zero say in what he's broadcasting, where I do think in the past, like, the anchors probably had more of a say. But in my opinion, news like that is far more appreciated by the audience than watching, say, an hour of Hannity on Fox News, who is clearly as far to the right as could be, or watching Rachel Maddow on MSNBC. And that's why, like I obviously, since we're a public radio station, I stay away from news opinions because it's not my job to be. But if something is happening, like Kamala Harris today is speaking in Greensboro, there's nothing wrong with saying that. Or if I'm like, one thing I like to do, because we do 4 talk breaks an hour, and I always tell like the announcers, have your breaks planned. Know what you're going to talk about before you open up the mic. So at the top of the hour, we do NPR News. And like I'll tease it in my 4th break each hour on the morning show. And I might say, talks to remove Joe Biden continue. We'll get the latest with NPR News. You're teasing the story. You're talking about how, because the quote-unquote disastrous debate debacle, or however like NPR News would talk about it, I'll leave that to them to describe it how they do. But me teasing it is not getting political. It's just talking about stuff that needs to be mentioned. And I think by promoting it, you're doing a service to let people know that that's coming up at the top of the hour.
How has working on an HBCU campus changed how you approach your work? What has it felt like to be a part of such a different landscape, a different community?
I honestly don't even consider like working at an HBCU different than working at a regular, or I shouldn't say regular, a non-public radio station is what I should say. What I like about this job is that we get to for a better word, mentor students.
Okay.
And that to me is probably the most rewarding part of this job. Each semester, like 4 times a year, I will talk to like various mass communications classes, and then afterwards I'll say to them, oh, if any of you have any questions or want to learn more, come by and talk to me. And we do fundraisers throughout the year too. That's the other thing. Like I've never worked at stations before that had to do fundraisers like throughout the year. So 4 times a year we do fundraisers, and one of the fundraisers I was talking to one of the volunteers who was a student at the school, and her name was Jahara Hayes, and I remember I walked out of the room and I called up our general manager and I said, I think I found somebody who's gonna be on the air here one day. And she said, what? And I told her, I said I just love her attitude, and I could tell she wants to learn. And she was a student here, and she graduated last October, I believe. So I worked with her, and she had never been on the air before. So I said, okay, I'm going to give you a shift. Tuesday night, I think it was, or Thursday night, 8 to 10 p.m. So basically a 2-hour shift. And I worked with her every week to improve, to get to where... So first she was doing one shift, then she was doing 2 shifts, and a few months ago she was hired full-time to do social media. And to me, like, being able to say, this broadcaster has a full-time job in radio right out of college, right at the place where she went to school for, it's so rewarding to me. And now I'm working with, I'm going to be working with another one of our students who expressed a similar interest. And I guarantee you, if you and I sit here like a year from now and talk, I'll bet you she's full-time as well. Sure. Because to me, being able to, and I've been doing this so long, like almost 40 years, which is hard to believe, that I love being able to help students of today who are tomorrow's broadcasters.
Sure. No, that student connection piece is important. But I want to push you here because I understand it does feel like other radio stations you worked at, I'm sure, from a technical standpoint and the work that you have to do and what you have to perform on radio. But you're on an HBCU campus, so you're experiencing some very specific cultural dynamics that happen that you don't see on other college campuses, from homecoming to spring weekends, to the histories of these schools are such deep, rich, important histories. They deal with different issues around resources and community dynamics and issues like gentrification. Like, what does it mean to be doing radio in the HBCU space, and how has it shaped you in any way? I don't even want to say politically, because I'm not talking about politics with a capital P. I mean how you see the world around you. How has it changed you?
Well, like when we do homecoming, we basically ride in a truck and walk outside the whole parade route and greet everybody that's like watching the parade, and you see how important this radio station is and this HBCU is to the community. And even further than like something like a event like that, we host concerts in Durham, like the Playlist Concert Series, and you see how diverse our listening audience is. Because like when you go to a Durham Playlist Concert Series, it's a mix of everybody, and it's the community coming together. And I think I have an appreciation for the diversity in this community more than or in this state more than I would have before I even worked here. I see how hard every single student like that I see on campus, and then I'll talk to how hard they work to get their degree, to be a part of North Carolina Central University and to succeed. And that's why when I see somebody like Jahara and I see something in them, I want to go out of my way to do as much as I can to help them as an individual succeed. And it really has no difference to do with HBCU or not an HBCU, because I look back to myself back in, like, I went to college in 1987 to 1989, and if I was given that opportunity by anybody at a station, or like if there was a college station. Where I went to college, we didn't have a radio station on campus, but if we did and somebody offered me the opportunity, I would have ran with it. And the fact that I can help students in this environment, in this HBCU at North Carolina Central, it's just a very rewarding part of the job to me.
Yeah, I think the focus on students and mentorship at HBCUs is very unique. It is very special, and you're saying what you're saying is a part of that.
Oh yeah,
and it sounds like that's something that's a little different from what your career trajectory was before that.
It's different, and it's not like when I spoke to a class last week who was having a summer session. They said to me, one of the kids said, would you recommend learning as many different areas as I can in broadcasting? And I said, I'm going to give you 2 pieces of advice. I said, number one, yes. I said, learn as much as you can, whether it's programming, editing, news, production, whatever you want to learn as much as you can. I said, and the second thing I'm going to tell you, network. Mm-hmm. I still remember his name, and I'm actually Facebook friends with him. He's probably in his 80s by now. But my professor at Suffolk Community College, my broadcasting professor, was named Howard Stevens, and he said to us back in 1987, again, the most important thing I'm going to tell you, remember this word, networking. And back then, there was no social media or anything, and I look back at that advice and how everybody in this industry is somehow connected across the country. Like everybody knows everybody, and if you don't know somebody you know knows them. So that's why it is so important to, number one, like I said, learn as many different areas as you can, and then network as much as possible. Because if you don't get a job, say, at WNCU, there might be a job somewhere else, and I might know somebody, you might make a connection with somebody, and word of mouth is as important as the experience you got in your college degree.
Have you learned a bit about the HBCU radio networks?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We went to a public radio conference. It was my first time attending it, but we went to a public radio conference last year in Philadelphia, and it was just great. It was a 3 or 4 day event, and it was just great to get to hear all the different perspectives and meet all, and again, this is going back to networking, meet all the different people in the industry. And I just reached out last week myself because I'm putting together, and again, I'm approaching my 2 years now, but I'm almost done putting it together, a programming manual for WNCU for the entire air staff. And I needed like a model to start it with, and I reached out to one of the people I met who actually ran the conference. Her name was Abby Goldstein, and I said, "Hey, would you know anybody who might have like a manual I can use to, like as a template?" And she hooked me up with like an online resource that basically connected me to a whole network of people, and I got like a bunch of responses back literally within 15 minutes, and I used one of them and another model I already had and put together my own template, which obviously I rewrote myself and put in stuff specific to the radio station. But it's amazing how everybody who works in this industry is connected. And then I realize I'm branching out of what you asked me, but
okay, well, when your day in radio comes and goes, what do you want your legacy to be?
Ooh, I mostly I want to be like, okay, he loved what he did. I've had so many, and I shouldn't say so many because they basically like the jobs I've described in this interview that you and I've had. In almost every one of the interviews, when I wound up getting the job, they said, you know what? One of the things we noticed about you have a passion for this industry. You can hear it in your voice. And I want people to remember me as the person who loved what he did and had a passion for it. Whether it's a news job, whether it's a programming job, whether it's on air, I do have a passion for everything I've done.
Okay. And what's your proudest accomplishment so far in your brief career here at WNCU?
WNCU was without a program director for several years. I think it was 4.5 years. So when I came in, I was told, the station's got a few Band-Aids that need to be fixed. And being I'm very meticulously organized, and like when I looked at the music computer and the database, it was very unstructured, for a better word. Like if you go into Music Master or Wide Orbit, like I'll use Miles Davis as an example. It would, like artists could be in as Miles, comma Davis, Davis, comma Miles, or like BB King, B period King, or BB King, and there was no rhyme or reason as to how artists were entered. So you could get the same artist showing up 3 times, 4 times an hour. There was no structure, no separation. So I basically went through our entire playlist before I restructured like categories, and I labeled them by specific artists, like the way every artist would be mentioned the same. And if there were multiple artists performing on a record, each of them would be so they wouldn't come up again. Then I went through and put tempo codes in each song, like it was slow, if it was medium, it was fast. Then I went through and put time codes in on each song, and it might not sound like a long job to do, but when you have a playlist, well, a library with probably 12 to 15,000 songs in there, I would say, because at the time when I got hired here, I was doing a 2-hour air shift in the afternoon before I moved to mornings. I would say for the first 6 months I was at this job, with the exception of my 2 hours on the air, the rest of the time was literally spent nonstop in front of a computer making that music playlist perfect. And I'm not saying it's perfect now, but like getting it to the way I wanted. Yeah. So far in the year and whatever 9 or 10 months I've been here, I think that's what I'm most proudest of. Obviously, working with the students and helping students, I'm very proud of that. But just the overhaul of what I've done, because I noticed the difference when I tune in, and I think in my opinion, the listeners notice it as well.
Yeah. What does HBCU radio mean to you? And I'm going to say this more broadly. What does Black radio mean to you in your brief experience working at this station? What have you learned about that history and that lineage?
Ooh, obviously, I have never worked at an urban station, for a better word, or like a primarily black listeners.
It's okay to say Black radio.
Right. So my goal, I mean, to me, my goal is to entertain the listeners. It doesn't matter if they're black, if they're white, if they're Hispanic. So basically, in a nutshell, each month when I get the ratings, I'll see like one of the things you see is what percentage of the listeners that month were black, what percentage were white, what percentage were Hispanic, male, female, etc. So rather than looking at it as, okay, I'm working at an HBCU, and my goal is to make the station sound good on the air and listenable to everyone, and obviously I have to mold it more to a black or an African American audience than I would in the past, because you have to know your demo, and the primary listeners of our station, like it's typically about 55-58% of the listeners each month are black. So when I am programming playlists, obviously jazz has like a great amount of black or African American artists, but also with those R&B songs I put in as well, it's playing the artists and the songs that have the history with the community, with the audience that they are going to appreciate. And like one of the things I implemented or re-implemented, because it used to be a feature apparently in the past, but it wasn't for a few years, on the air each month we do an artist of the month. And like this month it's Delphio Marsalis, and basically once a shift, twice a shift, we're gonna play that artist more than we would. So I'll and almost every one of our artists of the month obviously have been African American or black, and I'll go out of my way to put a great bio in there, put in every CD or every song we have by them, and it's almost like expanding the format. So like right now, Delphio, like next month, and I'm giving it away right now, next month our artist of the month is Charlie Parker, who has a vast majority of music. This month it's Delphio Marsalis, and probably of the Marsalis brothers, Winton and Branford, like if Branford Marsalis, who teaches here, was one of our artists of the month, we'd have a much wider selection of music to play from. I selected Delphio because I want the community to not only learn more about him, but his music, and I love Branford's music, I love Winton's music, but Delphio Marsalis is just, he makes fun music that's like New Orleans based almost, and I want to basically introduce or expose the audience to something they might not expect, and basically expand their appeal for music like that.
And what do you think about what we're doing as the HBCU Radio Preservation Project? I know you've only been here for a brief time, but why do you think it's important that the history of these institutions, of these cultural institutions that mean a lot to their listenerships in these communities, why do you think it's important that we're preserving this history?
Oh, I mean, just the advancement of Black people, African Americans, however you want to put it. When I go back to like when I was a kid, like just think of how like if somebody would have said when I was a kid, oh, by the time you're in your 40s, we're gonna have a Black president. People would have said, oh, that's impossible. And Barack Obama wound up being one of the best presidents I think this country has had in my lifetime, along with a couple others. But just the fact that I think anybody can do anything and achieve anything. And I think showing the history of Black radio, of HBCU radio, of the community, just showing like how far things have come over the years. And we've been on the air since the summer of 1995, so this is coming up on 29 years. And just to think of how things have changed from 1995 to now. I mean, it's amazing. And I think by documenting, by archiving everything from whether it's a musical show that the station might have carried 30 years ago, or if it's a public service show, I think just by archiving and showing the history of it, it's something that people can look back on 10 years, 50 years, 100 years after you and I are long gone, and say, wow, this is pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's a radical act in its own right to preserve this story, right? You probably didn't learn too much about Black radio or HBCU radio when you were learning about radio first as a young person.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, to me, there was top 40 radio and rock radio. I mean, I grew up on Long Island and adult contemporary. So, no. And it wasn't until like New York City radio that I saw like the urban stations, like the Hot 97s, yeah.
Right. Okay, well, obviously we couldn't get to your entire life in just an hour, but what is something that we left out of this story that you'd like to share, or maybe some people you'd like to shout out before we close this interview?
Ooh, some people I'd like to shout out or share. Well, I've worked with so many great people over the years. I mean, I mentioned the morning team at WBT, Bo Thompson, Beth Troutman. There's a producer named Bernie Knowles there. My PD there, Mike Schaefer. News director Mark Garrison. Every single one of them were just amazing people to work with. At Fox News, all the anchors and producers that I worked with, from Karen and Lisa and all the other people that I worked with there. And I'm not going to start mentioning their names because I know I'm going to wind up forgetting some people. But I would say the most important to me was when I started out in radio at WVLI, where I worked for 12 years. Every single person that I worked with, I remained in touch with for 40 years because they saw me grow up. They saw me become who I am today. And I am who I am today because of them. Steve Harper, who was the morning guy. Rick Summers, who was another morning guy who sadly passed away this year. A guy named Mike Larkin, who was the promotions director at the time. Probably the person who has guided me most in my early career was him. And the program director there was a gentleman named Bill Terry. And last thing I'm going to mention... the second program director I worked for there, because when it was restructuring and stations were sold, PDs got shifted out. And the second PD was a guy named Stephen Ryback, who I'm still Facebook friends with and friends with today. But he gave me advice. And back then, people were more blunt. You didn't have to worry. So maybe it was like 1992 or 93, and I gave him an air check because I'd only done like promotional stuff on the air, like not a DJ shift, but I would do like reports here and there. from like the beach or something. And I gave him an air check. And I still remember the words he said to me. He listened to my air check and he's like, Mark, remember this advice. And this was on Long Island. He's like, listening to your tape, picture you started out in Miami and you want to get to Long Island. He's like, right now I'd say you're in Atlanta. And at the time I was like, whoa, that's like harsh. But all these years later, I still remember those words, and I use it to better myself at every single job I'm at. And even though now I'm in North Carolina, but like when I left New York, I said, okay, I finally made it from Miami to New York in the step and Ryback scale of things, and now I'm in North Carolina, and I'm doing what I love, and I feel like everything that got me to where I was at that point in New York and to where I am now is because of all these great people that I've worked with over the years, and I will cherish not only their friendships, each of the people I mentioned and all the people I'm forgetting to mention, but what each one of them as a broadcaster taught me.
That's great. That's a great place to close on that. Mark, I really appreciate you sharing your story and being
Will.
a part of this collection of oral history interviews for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project.
Thank you, Will. This has been great.